let's get started with our Q&A because I know they want us to wrap up right at 7:30 tonight. They're going to kick us out. They're going to play Closing Time by Semisonic. Okay. Oh, we got another one. Great. I'm going to grab that, and I'm also going to start with this question that came in first. So someone asked, please discuss how license and the teachers union are barriers to teachers of color. Maybe go into a little more detail about that.
Start with that. I feel like that's you.
Yeah. And we talked a little bit about licensure already. We increased teacher diversity in the state of Minnesota mainly because we called teachers in the classroom teachers. That was the major change. We had people called community experts or on variants, but we weren't actually calling them teachers. They were in the classroom, educating kids. We're teachers of record, and then we had the audacity to say you are a teacher, and that's kind of the drastic move that happened. And then we created pathways for those people to become long-term professional educators with their standard full license. So we created that pathway into full teacher licensure. People like Haben, for example, came into the profession as what we call a tier 2 teacher. So we go tier 1 is a first year, as a 1-year teacher, tier 2 is a 2-year, tier 3 is a 3-year, tier 4 is an 5-year teacher, right? So we go through that pathway, and if you block any of those paths, it becomes more difficult to be a full-time professional educator. And so what happened at this last legislative session was we blocked the tier 2 path. So we made it way more difficult for that tier 1 teacher to move to tier 2, who that teacher can no longer then move to tier 3, and so on and so on. And so that's how teacher licensure, we've been able to first call teachers teachers, and then secondly, create clear pathways in order to have full professional licensure. The question about, and I'll speak it more broadly, but when we're not talking about teachers of color as the focus or the goal, or making sure that students of color have an educator of color in the classroom, everyone's goals kind of just mishmash. And so what was really happening was we had teacher preparation programs saying, we should be the focus of this conversation. We had current educators in the classroom saying, we should be the focus of this conversation. And so a lot of different interests were coming into play, which I think influenced the way that we've prevented educators of color from being able to keep a license. And the stories of educators of color were not necessarily the ones that were centered.
Would anyone like to add to that?
Yeah. I wanted to add that licensure in itself or unions in itself are not the barriers. I think it's how we work with them, okay? Because we all have a part in what we do, whether as an organization, as individuals, in what we do as part of the ecosystem called education. We may not like that sometimes. I think that's where some of the friction is. So and maybe it's coming up as my own philosophy of how to do the work. That sometimes, in order to really advance change, we're going to have those different ways of thinking come together. That I may not always agree with the union, but I also agree that without the union, we wouldn't have prep time. We wouldn't have other things going on. So no organization is perfect that way. So just so that you know, the unions, the educator unions is very supportive, Education Minnesota to be specific, very supportive of Elevate teaching. Partly because they realize, they know, right, that we can promote the profession in a way that is almost different than they can promote. Because unions have a very specific purpose of serving their memberships, right? So when you start thinking about that a little bit more nuanced, then we can work together on places that we can agree, and then work on places that and then maybe really debate on the places that we may not agree. But I truly believe the system change have to start with at least the places that we do agree around the union.
As far as the tier licensure, one thing I do want to just put forth is if we're going to have these requirements, so we're talking about hey, we want you to get a master's degree. We want you to go through a traditional teacher prep program. How are you going to help us do that? So I came to the part of the reason I came to Minnesota is because I did want to pursue a master's degree in something. And I took a year to decide that I did want to do it in education, but I had to make a lot of sacrifices to make that happen. So the first was deciding I'm going to move back home with my parents at age 28 so I can actually pay it off in cash and not have to take out student loans. One other thing that I was able to navigate was being able to get a scholarship through my mom's job. So I applied for this scholarship, didn't know if I was going to get it, and I actually ended up getting it with the help of one of my colleagues there, John Bacall. He wrote me a letter of recommendation as well as my boss, and I was able to get a full ride to help pay for that. But what about for all the aspiring teachers that maybe are not able to get a scholarship? What are we going to do to support those people? And then I was working full time. It was a huge sacrifice. I had no free time, no evenings, no weekends. It feels nice to just be able to sleep on a Sunday for once. So, I didn't do that for 3 years. And so it's a huge sacrifice to move up these tiers. So we have to figure out how are we going to support people if we're going to have these things in place. How are we going to support people, especially diverse teachers, to be able to accomplish those things? Because it's incredibly challenging if you didn't, go into undergrad thinking, oh, I'm going to be a teacher and prepare for it.
The only other thing I would add is that just from knowing your history and just the fact that, for instance, my grandfather was a Chicago public schools teacher. And back then in the 60s and 70s, Black teachers were the predominant representation of the teaching workforce. And so, they were given they had these titles and then they were demoted. Yep. And so know your history is really important of the fact that we've been here before and we've been given more barriers and barriers. My grandfather was successful at ridding the oral discriminatory practices that were on exams and for maintaining licensure. And so there's pieces of the work that we have to understand who benefits, who burdens when we create these policies and practices that rid people in and rid people out of the system.
I would also add that I also do not want a system that give us free handouts, right? Not free in the sense that, how do I say this? As people of color, we've been through a lot, and we are resilient people. We want the support to get to where we are, absolutely, right? And so the question is, how do we make that support be more visible so that we know how to find them, okay? And how do we keep our faith that we need to support, we need a way, an infrastructure that get from wanting to be a teacher to become a teacher with all the resources and different ways of navigating what you need to do, right, to become a teacher. Absolutely. But I do not want us to lower the standards for the profession, because it is a profession. It is a profession. And maybe, some of us might say, well, we need to lower so that we can have more people come in. But I would say that actually there's a lot of research that says lowering standard does not help people coming in and staying, okay? Actually, if it is a profession, if you look at how other countries do it, it's actually a very highly regarded, hard to get in profession. In fact, I had people from another country say, oh my God, you know what? I have to consider teaching because I couldn't be a lawyer. I'm not kidding, okay? That is a different mindset. It's a different mindset of how we think about our teaching profession, okay? Again, absolutely we need to work on the barriers, but I also want to think about what does it mean to be a profession? What does it mean to stay professional in a field that is so highly impactful with students, especially students of color?
I'll just say I do agree with that. One thing I want to add to when we talk about what does it mean to be a great teacher, knowing your content is really important. Right? Mm-hmm. You have to know your content, and you have to know some basics, obviously classroom management, things like that. But I think there's a lot of things that are not assessed when we think about what makes a great teacher, right? Like how, like as a math teacher, I'm confronted every day with sort of low self-efficacy, students having really low confidence, right? Math trauma. So how do you engage young people? How do you activate their excitement around mathematics? And that's something that's often not assessed when we talk about great teachers, right? And so we do need to talk about what really does make a great teacher, and it's far more than knowing your content. And so how do we support, you know, those emerging teachers that really want, that maybe need help navigating those tests or those systems, but they know how to get a classroom's attention. And if you can't get students' attention, you can't be a great teacher. And so how do we get those personalities, those people that have the capacity, right? Because they know how to get people's attention, and how do we get them into the profession?
Going a little off topic here, but stick with me. There was a great This American Life episode about a gondolier who she wanted to be a gondolier in Italy, and they said, no, you have to be a man to be a gondolier. And the conversation was often, if we allow women to be gondoliers, then we're lowering the standard of what a gondolier is. And the standard was surrounding maleness, chauvinism, right? And I often, it's very difficult to separate the standards that we've designed around a predominantly white profession that's predominantly held by white women, and say, this is the standard, which is different from white supremacy within the profession. So I think we have to be very intentional about saying, what is the standard that we want to promote within teaching so that we can have great educators in the classroom, and which standards are based on white supremacy that we need to eliminate in order for people to be part of the profession that aren't currently part of the profession.
Yes.
I was going to say, thank you for saying that, because that same thought popped into my head. I'm remembering a meeting at work about making sure that we didn't equate teachers of color or artists of color with low standards.
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
that automatic assumption that sometimes people make. One more point on this, and
I
then
would
go ahead.
make a final, actually it's a good thing that is happening, but we are not going to see the results probably for another 2 years. The latest standards for teachers in terms of what it takes to become a teacher, to be licensed, those standards are anti-racist, very, very centered on cultural responsiveness. So there is hope. And those standards are very different than the standards that we have right now. But it takes a little while to implement, and we also need to think about the people who actually teach them. Are they prepared to teach those standards? Right? So that's a whole different conversation. But just so people know, there are new standards coming, and they are already in law now. So it's a matter of implementation. So very excited about that. Yeah.
Well, we had one invitation, not necessarily a question. Oh, did another one come in? Did I miss it? I was looking the other way. It did. Okay, I'm going to save this one. This one says, in my classes, I find it helpful to define our terms. As such, can we reach a common definition of profession? And how does this operate in comparison to other established professions?
Yeah.
Anyone?
Well, as someone who's been in another profession, and actually most of us have in different professions, a profession comes with a sense of like for example, when I was an engineer, as a professional, you actually do adhere to certain standards, right? You do have a little bit of autonomy. Not always, but some. And that you are not doing things that are only technical. It's not as if you do A, you get B. And if you do B, you get C. Okay? Because we are more than technicians. Right? A professional means that you're always solving problems. And situations are very adaptive in the sense that you don't know what the answers are. No matter how much training you have, Sometimes the answers are going to come through actually in the context of problem solving. And you're often working with teams. Okay? So professional has as a profession, and it's evolving as we talk about, right? That you're always evolving. You evolve with the times. So those are some of the things I can think about.
Yeah, I think the term profession and professional and professionalism are very political terms of who kind of belongs in the circles and who doesn't. A couple of battles that we had to fight around teacher licensure is they said that a tier 3 and a tier 4 teacher are considered professional licenses. What does that imply, right? It implies that teachers like Haben with a tier 2 license are not professional or not within a profession. I was on a call the other day. I'm looking at Julian, who was an amazing student advocate and activist with Bridgemakers. And the call was a policymaker who said that you brought kids of color to the Capitol and they acted unprofessional, right? And I said, they were amazing. They were part of the civic process. They were engaging. They didn't name call. They were amazing voices at the Capitol. What I'm hearing you say is they don't belong here. And so I don't have a definition of profession and professional or professionalism, because I try to avoid it as much as possible, because it is often used as a tool to say these are the people who belong and these are the people who don't.
I would just throw in that, oh, now the thought just left my head. Well, I was going to say partly that as an actor, I was part of the Actors Union, and that was considered the step to being a professional. It was joining the union. But I will say, oh, there it is. There it's back. For me, when I hear the term professional, trying to divorce it from the political term, I think about a shared set of values around the work. Like, as an actor, I am committed to, well, I have been an actor, for those of you that don't know, theater actor. Committed to doing my part to produce a high quality, by that meaning an experience that everyone in the audience can relate to, high quality production. So that's a value, I think, that is shared in the theater world. So for me, it's not about like, how many credentials do you have? Do you talk the right way? Do you dress the right way? Do you act the right way? It's more about, do you share values with these folks? As teachers, I can point to all the good teachers that I've had, the great teachers. And I can say, I know the main value that I took away and that I use when I'm interacting with students, I am also an educator, is that I care about them. It's like I would say that is the shared value of a professional teacher, is someone who cares about their students. And I can see it in my son's school too. Well, we are at, again, I said they're going to kick us out of here. They're going to tell us we don't have to go home, but we got to get the heck out of here. So this last note was, I invite you to support the Minneapolis public school teacher. We are in negotiations. We need a better payment. We are professionals. So someone dropped a note that's just inviting everyone to give their support to the Minneapolis public school teachers right now. I am going to wrap up our Q&A here, but I don't think that this is where the conversation has to end. I think that we can all continue to engage with one another, continue to engage with our presenters.